Chris, did you learn anything about men versus women in pay in WWE?
We did. Men and women have, the same contract terms. The tricky thing is the way it works is that wrestlers, they're guaranteed a base salary, but essentially their pay is based on the events they work and the merchandise they sell. So they get a cut of their merchandise profits, which is typically 25% of licensing profits and 5% of direct sale profits. And then they also get a cut of events. So if they work, say, an untelevised house show, kind of a local, smaller show that they'll do later in the week, wrestlers will get a cut of the gate, and that depends on where they fit on the card. So if you're in the main event, you get a bigger cut, and if you're one of the earlier matches, you'll get a smaller cut. The reason I run through all of that is because typically we see that the men's matches are the more high-profile ones, and the men's wrestlers tend to move more merchandise because they're more popular. And so for that reason, you see that men tend to make more than women in WWE, but it's sort of a function of that broader, landscape of how the WWE environment works out.
How strong a brand business is WWE financially?
I mean, it's pretty tremendous. Especially when you look at something like WrestleMania. I'd say, pretty much everyone is, aware it's going on. I have friends who don't follow wrestling at all and who, reach out to me or, talk to me and say, oh, I saw, a headline on ESPN about WrestleMania going on. So I think, they have a pretty broad reach, especially globally now. You've seen, WWE has been making headway into India, which is, somewhat surprisingly one of the biggest wrestling markets in the world. And so they've been making big pushes globally to expand. The company is in $800 million in revenue last year. I think, their operating income was something in the range of $100 million last year. So it's a huge company, and it's spread its umbrella to cover some non-wrestling areas. They have an in-house movie studio. They have licensing with things like video games, and cable TV shows. You'll see that they've had in the past, and they have their WWE network. Kind of started as a subscription network replacement for the old pay-per-view model, but also has a wealth of original programming and historical matches on there. And kind of all together, I think they've built an incredibly strong brand.
And thus, what do you think then of Vince McMahon as a businessman?
It's hard to deny the success he's had. A lot of people have been critical of him. It seems that he has a pretty significant role in, kind of the backstage, day-to-day operations of WWE in terms of what goes on in the ring. And I think a lot of people, a lot of the hardcore fans will quibble with his decisions of, in terms of what wrestlers should be winning championships. But the numbers kind of prove that, he has been consistently successful in building WWE up. He's obviously been in the driver's seat for quite a long time, and I think he is, deserves a ton of the credit for, building up from, the WWF days, through the Attitude Era and into today. And, the company's kind of had take on, a bunch of changes where in the Attitude Era, it was a lot more of the, shocking stuff, blood and sex and vulgarity, and they've kind of transitioned that into a more family-friendly product. And, the business is stronger than ever. So I think he deserves a lot of the credit for that.
Chris, were you a wrestling fan growing up? Where did you grow up?
I was. I grew up in New Jersey, and I think like a lot of people, I was a pretty big wrestling fan when I was younger, and then kind of grew out of it, so I went into high school. But, the funny story is I wound up getting back into it. A friend almost jokingly said, how funny it would be if we got back into wrestling, it was post-college, and we wound up, going to an event, and it gets its hook back in you, and all of a sudden you find yourself watching on a weekly basis.
And who did you like when you were growing up? And is there anyone, even casually now you're watching, but is there anyone that you like now?
Growing up, I guess I was really into WWE kind of the late 90s, early 2000s. So that'd be, Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock, Kane and Undertaker, kind of the Attitude Era area. So those are always my favorites and the ones who, if they show up, I'm still getting excited for. Today, I think today, if, you kind of look at the roster they have, I'd say it's, more in terms of athleticism and in-ring skill. I think it's, it's probably better than it's ever been for WWE. So there's, a million names you could say. I think AJ Styles has to be at the top of the list. For people who might not be familiar, he came over from Japan. He's kind of been all over the world in a bunch of different promotions, but was most recently in Japan and came over to the WWE last year. And watching him, it's just incredible, jaw-dropping, things he's able to do athletically. So I think he's thrilled to watch.
And Chris, where did you go to college? And did you study in journalism, or what was your major?
College was Hamilton College, a small liberal arts school upstate New York. And the funny thing is I didn't study journalism. Plan was to go to law school and head down to D.C. I studied political science, but fortunately wound up kind of falling into an internship here at Forbes when I was in college, working on sports stuff. And so I'm a lifelong sports fan, and, the business stuff has always fascinated me. And so it just turned into one of those things where, I liked the work I did here, kind of discovered a new career path, and they liked the work I did for them. And so fortuitously, had kind of a job set up for after college and have been here ever since.
Lawyers, or those studying to be law, become really good writers.
Yeah, maybe that was the case. It was one of those things where, the options were either go take on a bunch of debt to study law or do something I love doing, getting the chance to write about sports for a living. So for me, I think it was a pretty easy choice.
All right, Chris, we'll wrap this up. I'd like to know, what do you think made Forbes? There's so much. WWE back in the day, so you grew up in the Attitude Era, it really wasn't covered mainstream-wise. Now, maybe it's because of social media and online, you see all different types of mainstream sports and business publications, such as Forbes, covering WWE. Do you get any sense of, hey, what turned the page here? What made them now become more of a mainstream coverage area?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, actually, because you've seen in the last year or two, a lot of WWE Superstars are on, SportsCenter, doing interviews on ESPN, and you think even 5-10 years ago that would have been outrageous. And so I do think, social media plays a big part of that. The internet has allowed people much greater access to these superstars and has allowed them a much broader platform, I think. And so it's, where in years past, wrestling might have been a niche thing, or if you were a wrestling fan, it might have been seen as, kind of a nerdy hobby. It's now much more mainstream. And so I think that has led towards much more mainstream coverage in the media. And, in terms of Forbes and me personally, I think that a lot of, kind of the hard reporting in wrestling still remains, I guess, less mainstream, where it's these blogs or message boards where you see someone saying, so-and-so signed a contract or so-and-so is injured. And I've just found, personally, that a lot of that stuff is very unreliable. So I've, personally at Forbes think that, given how big the business is, given that it's a public company, and given, the massive global interest, more mainstream publications ought to be putting in kind of the time and effort, to kind of get things right and make sure that the info that's out there is accurate.
All right, Chris, so is there anywhere out there you want to share your social media that people can go at, or where they can find your work?
You can find the work. It's at Forbes.com. We have tons of great stuff, not just sports, but at Forbes.com/sportsmoney, we'll give you all of our sports business coverage. Just published big package on the business of baseball, team valuations, player earnings. So there's a wealth of stuff there on sports business. In addition to, we have a bunch of wrestling coverage as well. And personally, I'm at Chris Smith 813 on Twitter. Admittedly, not the most exciting follow in the world, but we'll have links to stories there and future coverage for anyone looking to follow along.
Don't sell yourself short. Anybody that's got Oscar the Grouch and Dr. J, come on.
I thought that's a wonderful picture, isn't it?
It's great. That was hysterical. It was good. All right, listen, Chris, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
All right.